Okay, so hi everyone. Thanks for joining us. My name is Maddie, and I am the marketing director here at McNally Jackson. And I'm so thrilled tonight to welcome you to another McNally Jackson virtual event. And even though we've resumed our in-store programming, we really love keeping these Zoom events going, in part because they give us the opportunity to bring writers together from around the world, or in tonight's case, someone who is local but couldn't join us in the store. And we are especially thrilled tonight to be launching Julie Otsuka's new book, The Swimmers, which is a novel about what happens to a group of obsessed recreational swimmers when a crack appears at the bottom of their local pool. And it was described as a tour de force of economy, precision, and emotional power. And this is a book that I loved very much. And I think that everyone who has read it would agree that it's really about so much more than's captured in that blurb. It's a small book, but its emotional breadth is quite large. And I'll just say before we start that we always need your support. So if you like these free events and want us to keep doing them, I would very much encourage you to buy Julie's book from us tonight. I'll post a link in the Zoom chat so you can hop right in and do that. Also take a look at our events calendar. We have these all the time, both online and back in our Seaport store, and we would love to see you. And so now I'm going to introduce our guests. Julie Otsuka was born and raised in California. She is a recipient of the Guggenheim Fellowship, and her first novel, When the Emperor Was Divine, won the 2003 Asian American Literacy Award and the 2003 American Libraries Association's Alex Award. Her second novel, The Buddha in the Attic, was a finalist for the National Book Award in 2011 and won the 2012 Penn Faulkner Award for Fiction and the 2011 Langham Prize in American Historical Fiction. The Buddha in the Attic was an international bestseller and winner of the prestigious Prix Femina Étranger in 2012 and the Albatross Literature Prize in 2013. And tonight she will be in conversation with the wonderful Katie Kitamura, whose most recent novel is the national bestseller Intimacies, which was longlisted for the 2021 National Book Award for Fiction and was named one of President Barack Obama's favorite books of 2021. Her previous novel, A Separation, was a finalist for the Premio Gregor von Razori and a New York Times notable book. And she also writes for publications, including the New York Times, The Guardian, Granta, Bomb, and Freeze, and she teaches in the creative writing program at New York University. So with that, I will pass it over. Oh, I'm sorry, I forgot the most important part, which is that at the end of their conversation, there'll be time for you guys to ask questions. So you can just submit those into the chat, start thinking about them now. And Katie is going to pass them along towards the end of the evening. So since you can't join me in a round of applause, I'll just say one last time that we're very pleased to welcome Julie. And with that, I'll pass things off to Katie.
Thank you so much. I'm so honored and delighted to be here with Julie Otsuka. Her work has been so significant to me. And Julie, I don't think anybody could possibly have come to this novel with more excitement or higher expectations than I did. And I was absolutely blown away. It's so beautiful. It's absolutely devastating. And I'm just so happy to be here with you tonight. I think you said that you'd be willing to read a few pages for us.
Sure. And thank you so much, Katie. And thank you to Maddie and everyone at McNally Jackson. I've been looking forward to this night for a long, long time. So I am just going to read the very first two paragraphs of the novel. And the first chapter is called The Underground Pool. The pool is located deep underground in a large cavernous chamber many feet beneath the streets of our town. Some of us come here because we are injured and need to heal. We suffer from bad backs, fallen arches, shattered dreams, broken hearts, anxiety, melancholia, anhedonia, the usual above ground afflictions. Others of us are employed at the college nearby and prefer to take our lunch breaks down below in the waters, far away from the harsh glares of our colleagues and screens. Some of us come here to escape, if only for an hour, our disappointing marriages on land. Many of us live in the neighborhood and simply love to swim. One of us, Alice, a retired lab technician now in the early stages of dementia, comes here because she always has. And even though she may not remember the combination to her locker or where she put her towel, the moment she slips into the water, she knows what to do. Her stroke is long and fluid. Her kick is strong, her mind clear. Up there, she says, I'm just another little old lady, but down here at the pool, I'm myself. Most days at the pool, we are able to leave our troubles on land behind. Failed painters become elegant breaststrokers. Untenured professors slice shark-like through the water with breathtaking speed. The newly divorced HR manager grabs a faded red styrofoam board and kicks with impunity. The downsized ad man floats, otter-like on his back as he stares up at the clouds on the painted pale blue ceiling, thinking, for the first time all day long, of nothing, let it go. Worriers stop worrying, bereaved widows cease to grieve. Out-of-work actors, unable to get traction above ground, glide effortlessly down the fast lane in their element. At last, I've arrived. And for a brief interlude, we are at home in the world. Bad moods lift, tics disappear, memories reawaken, migraines dissolve, and slowly, slowly, the chatter in our minds begins to subside as stroke after stroke, length after length, we swim. And when we are finished with our laps, we hoist ourselves up out of the pool, dripping and refreshed, our equilibrium restored, ready to face another day on land.
Thank you, Julie. It's really incredible to hear you read that. You start this novel with the community around the swimming pool, and about, I think, almost half the book is within this kind of collective voice of this group of people. And it's a kind of wonderfully tender portrait of a group of people with all their different idiosyncrasies and all the different kind of habits and rituals. And then you move from that space into some spaces that are much more fraught, I would say. The space of the care home, the kind of mental space of Alice as her memory starts to disintegrate. Did you always know that that swimming pool would be the starting point? And did you always know that that crack would appear and that you would move from that kind of calm space into something that feels much more turbulent, so to speak?
No, I kind of made it up as I went along. I had sketched out the first two paragraphs that I read. I'd sketched out in very, very rough form, probably about 15 years ago, when I was in the middle of writing my last novel. And then I just shoved them in a drawer and didn't look at them for a long time. But I was intrigued by writing about this world that I knew something about just from personal experience. And then when I finished writing The Buddha in the Attic, I pulled those scenes out of the drawer and I looked at them, and I just knew that I did not want to write about this world. I didn't know where I would go, but I had to begin and just work it out, work it through, and see what happened. And when I finished the first chapter, which just basically kind of lays the groundwork, it describes the world. Then I got the idea for the second chapter, The Crack. And then I knew at the end of that, that there would be a radical shift in point of view. And we'd suddenly narrow in on this one character whom we meet, but only very peripherally in the very beginning. But the second half of the book becomes her story.
I mean, it was shocking to me because I remember, when I read the first half, it seemed as if Alice, you could almost miss her. You see her, but she, as you said, she's only kind of peripherally mentioned. But of course, listening to you read it, she's right there at the very, very beginning of the novel. So was her character, did she exist in your mind 15 years ago when you wrote that opening, or was that something that kind of came to, did you identify her through the writing of that first half?
I actually did not conceive of Alice or of this as being Alice's story from the very beginning, but I did have a character who was just one of many,
Right.
who was beginning to decline from dementia. Um, and then, but I had these two things that I really wanted to write about, right? I wanted to write about the world of the pool, and I wanted to write in fictional form about what it was to be the daughter of someone who was suffering from dementia. And they just seemed like such radically different worlds. I didn't know how to connect them, but I'd also written this short story, Diem Perditi, probably about 2 years before I finished writing The Buddha in the Attic. So after I sketch out the pool scenes, but I somehow knew that that chapter would be the kind of still center of the novel. Um, and at a certain point, I got the idea to make the Alice character one of many. So it's good that you didn't really notice. I don't want you to notice in the beginning that I want her to seem like one of many. And
Yes.
yes, I don't want you to know that it's going to be her story.
Yes. No, she absolutely seemed like one of many. I mean, I think one of the things that the novel does as a form does very well in general is kind of capturing the tension between the experience of the individual and then a larger collective experience, whether it's a kind of particular historical moment or whether it's the kind of trauma of the swimming pool and its crack. And obviously you're, I would say, the best writer of the collective voice. I wonder if you could talk a little bit about how do you think of the individual? You know, this idea that I think your average writer wouldn't wait until the middle of the book to kind of introduce the reader to the so-called central character, but that seems very natural. That feels correct for you. So I just wonder, how do you position that kind of, how do you develop that collective voice, and how do you think of the individual in relationship to the group?
I mean, I wanted to be able to describe the world that Alice was leaving behind in full. I didn't want the reader to see her only as somebody who was failing. So I wanted to give them a taste of her literally in her element. But I love using the collective voice. I find it to be very, very capacious voice. It allows me just to tell just a much larger story than I would if I were just telling the story of one swimmer. And I only stumbled upon it when I began writing The Buddha in the Attic, and I found it really freeing. I mean, I found I loved writing in this voice, and I don't really know why. I think I'm just naturally interested really in people and in groups of people and in the dynamics, whether they be family dynamics or just, group dynamics. But so I wanted the pool really to be a stand-in for the world at large.
You said at the beginning that you wanted to write about the relationship between a mother and a daughter, or the daughter's experience of a mother losing her memory. That's really very much at the heart of the novel. But again, it kind of it really sneaks up on the reader a little bit, and I think it really fully articulates itself in the final sections of the novel. You write so well about children and their parents, and you write very well about kind of transformations that the parents undergo. I'm thinking about the father in When the Emperor Was Divine. I'm thinking about the mother in this novel. I just, what is it about that particular relationship that you kind of keep returning to?
I mean, I guess my only experience of that relationship is being on the younger end as being a child, since I don't have children. So, and I do find family dynamics just endlessly fascinating. So I guess I'm always writing from a very personal starting point when I do write about families. And I guess I tend to probably identify more with the children than I do with the parents all these years later.
There, I mean, it's interesting because I think in some ways, I think I read somewhere that you described the Buddha in the Attic almost as a prequel to When the Emperor Was Divine, but there's a very kind of close relationship between those two books. I mean, this is, I suppose, the first novel that is not what is technically called a historical novel, but it's a novel for which history is very, very important. And this sense that with Alice's memory loss, we're also losing a kind of the memories of a generation that experienced the war and the generation that was in the internment camps in California and beyond. So I guess I wonder what was that shift into writing a strictly kind of contemporary setting? You know, did you feel that to be a different process for you in any way? And then did it feel very natural to kind of open the book up to kind of have this historical scope in the end as well?
You know, I didn't think that I would end up emphasizing the past as much as I did. I think part of me just has a hard time, no matter what I write, getting away from that. But I'd never written anything until this novel that was set in the present, and I actually really loved it. I mean, before I began to write When the Emperor Was Divine in graduate school, I entered as a writer of, hopefully, comedic fiction, short stories set in the now. They were not very good, but that was really my starting point as a writer. And so I started from a point of humor, and I never thought of myself as being, a writer of serious historical fiction. That came to me a little bit later. So it actually felt kind of natural, actually, to be returning to the present moment, and just really a lot of fun. And also, I didn't have to do half as much research as I did.
I was about to ask about the research. I was describing. I was trying, the kind of intricacy. I feel like when every sentence in for example, the Buddha in the attic, it feels like it could be months of research.
Actually,
because
you're right.
Right, like crystallizing an entire life into one sentence, and this is, you're doing the same thing. You're capturing the entire range and scope of a life and the kind of essence of a character. But I suppose it was maybe less research than it must have been for those novels.
Yeah, and yet it took me longer to write this book than it did to write each of my previous books. So I don't know why, but I did do some research, but it was the first time that I'd drawn on my own personal experience for my novel. And that was actually, it was really interesting. It was really different. I've never written in the first person voice about myself before, fictionally. So I think the second person you voice is as close as I'm able to come at this point.
I was actually going to ask about that, about the kind of use of the first person and how instead it's a second person voice in which the kind of author character appears. I mean, I also find I write in first person, but I find it a very fraught experience.
You do?
Yeah,
I
do.
love your first person narrator
and
intimacies. I mean, just the prose and the language and just what she's thinking, just this sense of longing and loss, but it's there, but it's very quietly there. Yeah, so I admire that.
But I find first person, I find it difficult. It doesn't come naturally to me, and I wonder what
I would never know that.
What is it about first person that presents a difficulty to you, do you think?
I think I don't have enough distance on myself if I'm writing about something personal. And it's like, when I used to paint, and when I was painting, I'd sometimes look at what I was painting in the mirror just to get a slightly different, picture of it. And then you'd see things that you wouldn't normally see. And I feel like the same thing happens when I use the second person voice. I'm just one step removed from the subject at hand. And that for some reason makes it a little bit easier to objectify what it is that I'm looking at, even if what it is that I'm looking at is myself. I can almost look at myself as an observer.
One of the things that I think is kind of so virtuosic in your writing is these very big formal shifts that you make between voices, and you use second person 2 registers. One is this really terrifying but also very funny, when you were saying comedic writing, I mean very funny but terrifying chapter that is the kind of voice of an institution of the care home. So I believe it's a care home, or it's a that seemed like you were having a lot of fun, but what was the experience of writing? I actually could not tell what was document. I mean, sometimes it felt strictly documentary, and then I thought, is this real or is this invented? It really began to take on this nightmarish quality, and it's incredibly powerful, and it's at once, you know, fantastically funny, but also really frightening. Can you talk that it felt a little bit different as well to some of your other writing? When did you know you wanted to inhabit that particular voice?
I think as soon as I thought of the first line, "You were here because you failed the test,"
Yes.
I could see what I could do with this voice. And it was a lot of fun. And I think I'm so used to often, especially in my first two novels, writing just from the point of view of the victims of history. And this was a complete flip of that. So I was writing in the voice of a somewhat malign institution, and I loved it. Much to my surprise, I could really identify with that. I mean, you in intimacies. I mean, you write about. I mean, you have this war criminal that the interpreter, you know, in some way is, you know, much to her surprise, is able to identify with. And it's surprising that we have it in us to identify with these, you know, somewhat evil forces, our presence in the world.
I think when I felt reading that chapter, which is so kind of spectacular that I immediately like went back and reread it in the middle of the book, was that you really captured the kind of sick libidinal energy and excitement of those kinds of voices, if that makes sense, with those institutions. There is a kind of glee to it, and there is a kind of really troubling pleasure in it, and I think that kind of weird you know, obscene energy is something that you capture really beautifully here, and it is also part of what makes it interesting to think and write about those institutions, you know, because that is part of their power as well, whether it's a kind of charismatic, you know, dictator, or whether it's this kind of you know, this voice that you develop for this institution. I really felt that very much, and it felt very, you know, there's so much lovely, to me, there's so much incredibly delicate humor in the first part with the pool, and then here it felt like it was kind of knives out with the humor. But was that, can I ask, was that heightened in any way, or was that a kind of more observational documentary approach, and simply, you know, sometimes when you just record the reality, it feels absurd. It wasn't actually gonna.
No, I did feel actually like I was just kind of describing reality, but then things were, I'm glad that you couldn't tell what was real and what wasn't, because a lot of I remember one of the translators, I think one of the French translators, the French translator of the novel asked, you know, or pointed out that there is no such thing as I think it's a peace and something forging, and I said, it's because I made it up. It's fiction, you know. So I made up a lot of the scientific facts, because I never specify exactly what sort of dementia that this character, until the very end, is suffering from. So the home doesn't know exactly what she's suffering from. So I had a lot of fun with this pseudoscience.
Right. And then you use the second person again with the figure, the daughter, who is a writer as well, and it is, I suppose, a reader will be tempted to read that as possibly a stand-in for you. But what led you to use the same form for those two sections, or those two voices?
I tried to write that last chapter in the first person, because I thought that would just be kind of an interesting shift, and maybe surprising, but again, I couldn't do it. It didn't feel right. And then it sort of made sense just to double the voice of D and Pretty, to go back to the second person voice. And that was the voice that I felt most comfortable with in writing that last chapter.
There's I guess this is, I don't know how to best, there's a wonderful section that made me think a little bit of the Joe Brainard I Remember piece, where it's this kind of it's this beautiful, quite extended section where it's what the central character Alice remembers and does not remember, and you just go through it systematically, and you create these wonderful rhythms, and it has this almost kind of incantatory quality to it, which is actually quite distinct from the other sections as well. I wonder, I mean, it feels like poetry. It feels like something else almost. I wondered how you crafted that. Is that primarily listening to rhythm? Is there a kind of oral quality to that for you?
I think there always is, but I think especially so in my last novel, In the Buddha in the Attic, that was very much about sound. But that chapter in particular almost kind of came to me as a chant or a song. So, and because there's so much repetition. And finding the right form for each chapter or each novel is really important for me. So once I got the idea of just using either she remembers or she does not remember as the beginning of every sentence, then I felt like that really allowed me just to really do a deep dive into this material that I didn't know how to get at otherwise.
I mean, is that generally the case, that you find the form for the piece almost before you know what it's about? I mean, or do they come up alongside each other?
I think always the form first, or else like the first line of Bella Vista, the sound of the voice, which in a way is the same thing as the form. But once I have an idea of the right either voice or form, then I can begin to write. But until then, it's often hard.
And you mentioned before that you're also you are a painter, or you were a painter, but you have a relationship to visual art. Has that affected the way that you write your fiction, do you think? Do you see?
I think so, in that I am almost a pointillist, I think, in the way that I write. And when I was painting, I'd always, if I sketched out a scene on the canvas, I'd just sketch things out very loosely, but in a very overall way. You don't want to focus on, one corner at the expense of everything else. And then I just bring up the details very slowly. And I feel like that is my same process when I'm sketching out a paragraph or a scene, is that I just sketch it out loosely, and I slowly bring up the details. And initially, no one detail is important than any other detail. I feel like the process in a way is sort of similar, although I don't always think. I think in my first novel, I was literally thinking very visually, just very much, it came to me very much as a series of pictures. I almost felt like my brain was a camera, but that was not the case with this novel.
I mean, I felt like, with the Buddha in the Attic, it almost feels like that kind of, there's equalizing quality to that detail, where every detail is equally significant because every life that it's describing is equally significant. So there's this wonderfully kind of almost democratic quality to that attention to detail, which is incredibly powerful. I mean, I guess I wondered, obviously, like famously something like Nabokov wrote his individual sentences on a single index card and then kind of move them around. But is that how you work? Are these pieces of text that you find the sequence kind of in the editing, or are you sitting down and just kind of writing in one clean? I mean, which is incredible if so, but are you kind of just sitting down and is it just coming out in a kind of perfect channeling of the, no, okay.
I wish I could show you this wall. I have all these Post-its, yellow Post-its. So I'll just have, sentences and I'll move things around. But especially for the DM Perditi chapter, I just literally had, each sentence was just one line. And they were like sticks, and I configured them this way and this way and this way and this way. I bundled them here or there. And so I was literally moving things around. So I feel like I do in that way work very visually. And then over there, they're just a lot of Post-its in my apartment. But I love them because I'll often forget, I'll scribble something down, an idea for a scene or something that I've heard, and snatch of dialogue, and then I'll forget that I've written it, and then months later I'll look at it and it will just kind of jog my memory. And then I like being able to literally move things around and just kind of fool around with the order of scenes and see what gestalt is the best.
I remember watching this documentary about the Romanian German writer Herta Müller, and she obviously she's a novelist, but she in her office she has like a table of cutout words from magazines, and she just moves them around like when she's taking a break from writing her fiction, and she creates different kind of poems or different collisions of words, and I feel like you can almost feel that in the kind of density of her prose, and in it, you can almost feel that she has that almost material relationship to language. I wanted to ask you, because I'm so interested in the way you are able to inhabit this collective voice, and I know that you often have written your novels in relative public spaces of a famous, you write in a cafe uptown in New York. How, is that process feeding into the novel that emerges, do you think, in any way?
I have literally used snatches of dialogue that I overheard in the cafe.
You're kidding, really?
and just drop them into the novel. In my first book, there's a line, the young boy is kind of repulsed at the sight of his father's really beat up slippers soles.
Yes.
And I remember hearing a woman in the cafe describing her mother's slippers just kind of with horror and disgust.
Yeah.
And so I just copied it down. I used it.
Amazing.
But yes, that's what I love about being just outside in public. I mean, and in a cafe, there are just so many fascinating conversations going, on at any one moment. And I love that, because sometimes what you hear or what I hear in real life is just so much more specific and interesting than any dialogue that I could make up,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And I think also the fact that in your fiction, often those fragments are allowed to sit on their own. You don't then kind of fill in the gaps around them and write the kind of back and forth of that dialogue, so that they're just kind of preserved as they are and as you heard them. I think, Maddie, I'm meant to remind everybody at this point that if you have questions, now would be a really good time to put them into the chat, so that I can read them out to Julie as we reach the end of the session. I know you said that you found yourself writing about internment, kind of almost, that wasn't what you intended the book to be about in some sense, but it really ended up inevitably kind of coming into the novel. I find myself thinking all the time about the fact that generation is now passing away. Was that at all part of what made it feel important to put that into the book, or was that simply or was it something else altogether?
Yeah, I mean, in a way, I see this novel as being the third piece of a trilogy.
Yes.
With Buddha actually being the first piece, and then Emperor, and then the Alice character could really be the girl in when the Emperor was fine. So I did want to track that experience. And although my intention when I began the book was really, I actually did not want to you don't even know the race, Alice's race, when we begin reading about her. I think it's a while before you realize that she's Japanese American.
Yes.
And I don't describe the race of any of the swimmers. I was interested in actually not addressing race head on, since that is what I've done in the past, is write very directly about race. And yet I still ended up writing, in the second half, a lot about this woman's memories of what happened to her during World War II. And I think, when my first book was published, I toured a lot on the West Coast, and I got to meet so many older Japanese Americans who'd been in the camps. And that was just, it was amazing to be able to meet the people that I'd been thinking and writing about for years in real life, and listen to them and their experiences. And actually got the idea for my second novel, For the Buddha in the Attic, from some of the stories that people would come up and tell me after my readings. So they would they would say, my mother or my grandmother or my great aunt came over to America as a picture bride. And when she got off the boat, she was shocked to see that her husband was so short or so ugly or so brown or so poor. So I did hear many different iterations of this story, and that I just thought this is just such a great story. It's just really all about fate. And that's what gave me the idea for my second novel. So even when I try not to write about World War II, I somehow end up there. And even I think when I try not to write about my mother in fictional form, I end up writing about my mother in fictional form.
There was something, I'm so happy to hear you say that they form a trilogy, because it did feel to me so much like this, history is memory in so many ways, right? It only exists as a kind of cultivated memory, and a kind of a narrative that exists in memory, and that we use memory to shape it. And that made, I have to say, that made the loss in this novel really even more devastating. And I think the fact that it came up a little bit, it didn't come up out of nowhere. When you see it, it's so carefully laid, but it was really the way it resonated, this kind of very personal loss, of this one character's memory. It kind of opened up into this historical register. It was really extraordinary. And I think that is something that you just do so incredibly well, where it is personal story that is connecting to a collective loss in such a powerful and kind of, I know it's not effortless, but for the reader, it feels very effortless. So it's incredible, and it's lovely to think of those three books together. Maddie, do I need to be pivoting to questions now? Is that, I'm sorry, I can't quite find
Yeah,
you on
we have some great questions.
Okay, so I should.
Oh, and then if we have more time, you can keep going.
Okay. Shall I just read them? The first one is from Aaron. Hi, Julie. Big congrats on the new novel. I wonder, do you ever teach creative writing? And if you do, or were to, what advice you might have for young writers?
I've actually never taught. But if I were to teach, I would say that very little of writing is inspiration. I feel like most of writing is just putting in the time and the hours, the days, the weeks, the years. I feel like the people that I know from graduate school who actually ended up becoming published authors are the ones that just really kept at it. So I think perseverance has to do a lot with success. And I guess my main piece of advice would just be to try to cultivate a daily practice of writing. There is a Amos Oz, the Israeli writer, he compared the act of writing to that of being a shopkeeper. Every day you go to the store and you open it up, and some days you get customers and some days you don't. And I feel like it's the same with writing. Every day I would go to the cafe, and some days no customers, just not much was happening on the page, but at least I'd open the store and I'd try. There was a possibility that somebody might walk through the door, So, and I guess my other piece of advice would just be to read the best writers that you can.
Thank you. Jill's question is, what have you both read recently that you love, and what time of day do you write? Which is a good link to your question. You're thinking about a daily routine.
I feel like my routine is just all upside down. I used to write in the evenings in the cafe.
Did you say in the evenings?
In the evenings.
I have no idea.
Yeah, I think as I've gotten older, my writing hours shifted to later and later in the day. I used to be a mid-afternoon writer at the cafe, but now I write. Since the pandemic started, I've just been writing at home, and so I write mostly in the morning or late morning. I'm not really an early morning person, so that seems to be a good time. But it's hard not having just. I feel like I had more of a routine before, so I knew if I were in a certain space, the cafe, I was there to write. Whereas I'm always in my apartment, so it's not always clear when I should be working and when I should not be. But some of my favorite writers, I love Rachel Cusk. I reread her Outline trilogy during the pandemic, and you know, your writing is it reminds me of hers in a way. These narratives. Yeah, no, I mean, I you know, I read your book also during the pandemic, and something about these just kind of quiet, hyper observant female narrators. We haven't historically always heard from voices like these, and they're deceptively recessive initially in presentation, and yet that's not what they are at all. And it's really a pleasure to be inside their minds and with them.
Thank you, Julie. The next question is, besides your editor, do you rely on any other people to read and make suggestions on your writing?
I show my work to very few people as I'm writing. I call it being inside the egg. I need to be in this safe kind of womb-like space, and I need to feel safe to make a mess. And then usually when I've finished a chapter, it's pretty tight and complete. And my first reader is always my agent. I'll send it to her, and I trust her judgment completely. There are a couple other people that I show my work to. And so it doesn't get to my editor until further on down the line. But I feel like when I'm finished with something, then I'm very open to criticism, and I'm not precious about, you know, I'm you know, I'll kind of seeing if it's not working at all. But while I'm working on something, I don't want to hear anything negative at all, because I know it's not, I know that there are many parts that are not working. And I think that's just a protective mechanism for myself.
Julie, are you sharing them? I mean, do you finish a section and then send it to your agent, or do you does it work in that way, or do you wait until you have a complete
Actually, no, because if I waited, it takes me so long to complete a book. I would have very infrequent email correspondence with my mom. And even, I mean, it could take me 2 years to write one chapter. So it is chapter by chapter. Right. And it's good to know that the thing I've just written is working, you know, or that she thinks it's working. That gives me, because I trust her judgment, so it gives me a lot of confidence to begin the next chapter. Because there are a lot of moments of doubt, but if I can just remember, well, the last one was working, so there's no reason why you couldn't, you know, shouldn't be able to make the next one work.
I mean, I was, you know, when you were saying earlier that the kind of biggest part of writing, or the kind of trick of writing, is perseverance, which I completely agree with. But I also think it's having the mental fortitude to hold a novel in your head for a long period of time, because you have to have the project unrealized in your head for often years. And in your case, you know, I think it is a number of years. How I mean, because I find, you know, the most difficult thing for me is this kind of crippling anxiety and doubt, and kind of living in the shadow of that. And this is, then I just kind of like, you know, finish it really quickly so I can get it. But I wondered, how do you sustain that? How do you sustain the project over that period of time?
I am completely in the present chapter that I'm writing.
Yes.
So I could, you know, I could even, I think once I have a chapter done and behind me, I don't really think about it a lot. Maybe I will during the editing process if there are just details that I want to bring up, but I don't spend a lot of time looking backwards.
Incredible. Thank you. Susan has a question. I love the work that both of you have created. I also adore the writing of Hanya Yanagihara and some other Japanese American women writers. Why do you think there aren't many, I can't think of one, current Japanese American men publishing?
Oh, what do you think? I can't.
Oh, is that true?
I mean, David Mora years ago. It's been a while, but that's really interesting.
Oh, that's really.
Oh wait, no.
Or who?
Sequoia. What is his
last
name?
Yes, who has a novel coming out? Yes, right. That just came out. Yes.
How high we? What is it called?
I can picture the cover in my head. It's a beautiful cover with these.
Right.
And it has a kind of speculative. Maddie, do you know? I can see you nodding.
I know the book. Yes, I know the book. I didn't realize it was by a man. I just hadn't thought of it. I know exactly what book it is called, like,
yes,
how
Yes.
high. Yeah. Sorry, I'm not doing any better than you guys. But
That's really interesting, though.
I don't know. I don't know. I don't have an answer. I mean, in general, there's a quite extraordinary group of young Asian American female writers who I think are a little younger than me, that who are just really extraordinary, working in so many different genres and forms and voices. And there are many women in that group. I think it is predominantly women, although there are some, obviously extraordinary Asian American male writers as well. I don't know what the answer is. I don't know what the answer is. Do you have a hypothesis, Julie, at all?
No, there aren't. Numbers wise, there just aren't very many Japanese American.
Japanese, I agree.
Period. Our numbers
Yes.
are really dwindling.
Yes.
But that doesn't explain. It's not that the male numbers are dwindling. Male and female numbers should be, dwindling equally. So I don't know.
If there's anybody on this Zoom who knows, please put it into the chat. I would, if there are writers, I'm just not thinking. It's certainly not the case in Japan. There are many Japanese male writers who have very big reputations. But no, I don't know what the answer is. A question from Harold: swimming is physical exertion. This is actually something that I've been kicking myself for not asking you. You are yourself an athlete. Does it have something to do with the way swimming allows the swimmers to get a break from otherwise tiresome or upsetting lives? Is physical exertion in other forms than swimming an undercurrent that runs through the book? Yeah, I would love to hear more about.
This is my friend from the gym. And he's an intense diehard weightlifter, as well as an English prof. So what was the question?
It says you yourself are an athlete. Does that have something to do with the ways swimming allows the swimmers to get a break from others' tiresome or upsetting lives? Is physical exertion in other forms than swimming an undercurrent that runs through the book? Which is such an interesting question.
I don't think that most of the swimmers go there to push themselves to the limit. I think a lot of the swimmers go there casually, recreationally, socially, almost, really for the community. But personally, as a writer, I feel like I write better after I worked out. So, just a physical workout is a good thing for the brain. So I feel like exercise is really important. I wouldn't call myself an athlete though, but I do, I do try to exercise, but I feel like it gives a clarity to the brain. Maybe it's just a, post endorphin rush or something, but maybe coffee would do the same thing. I don't know, but it does seem to help my thinking.
Was it the kind of community of the swimming pool, or was it the physical act of swimming where you first thought that's something I want to write about?
I think it was the community. Yeah.
The community. Right.
Yeah, because I did swim recreationally for years in New York City, and I was just fascinated by, I'm talking about ritual and routine. People just really have their, they would have to go at a certain time, they have to be a certain lane, if it was too crowded, people would get upset, there'd be sometimes fights, it was really fascinating to watch. And then there was this really nice community of women in the locker room that I got to know, and these women had known each other for many, many years, and sort of took me in, and that was really, it was lovely. I miss seeing them. Because the gym is closed now. But
is it? I have to ask: is your swimming pool okay, or is the crack only the fictional swimming? I feel worried about your swimming pool.
I no longer swim in this pool, but it's fine. But it is still open. The crack was purely invented.
The swimming pool it does function as a. You use enclosed spaces very powerfully in your fiction, whether it's the enclosed space of the swimming pool or the internment camps, and obviously those are very, very different spaces, and yet there's something about about it being a kind of space where the people can be other than they are, or people are forced to be other than they are in the so-called outside world. It feels like when, the kind of beautiful descriptions of how they can, and I think, as Harold has said, the break from otherwise tiresome or upsetting lives, but this space where, your identity isn't fixed in the way you believed it to be. And obviously with When the Emperor Was Divine, that is truly the case. Their identity is stripped away from those characters. I mean, is that, how much are you thinking about the kind of architecture of these spaces when you're writing? I feel like the swimming pool, I really can see it in my head, and I can see the crack even more. But how important is that physical space for you as a kind of fictional anchor?
It's really important, especially when I was writing When the Emperor Was Divine. I purposely didn't visit the site of the camp until after I finished writing the novel, because I wanted to literally build it just inch by inch, piece by piece in my head. So I did so much research, and I just had notes on every aspect of camp life, and I really wanted to be able to picture it. And then when I actually did visit it, it looked a lot like what I had imagined. So I feel like I am kind of literally building pictures of these spaces in my head. So the space is very important.
You often make this kind of very almost, The Swimmers in particular has so many of these kind of quite radical shifts, but certainly the kind of final chapter of When the Emperor Was Divine is really devastating, and it has a real tonal shift when you get into the kind of point of view of the father who's been absent for the entire novel. And similarly with the Buddha in the attic, the kind of final shift to the point of view of the people who were not interned and who remained. Do you always know where you're ending? Because those seem so much like they, and with the Swimmers as well, they feel so much like they define the novel. It's a kind of an ending point that is so devastating and also quite destabilizing. I mean, I reread When the Emperor Was Divine, and I found the ending really even more upsetting than I'd remembered it, because it was such a kind of representation of trauma and how this person has been broken. But are you writing towards that, or do you find, how do you know, do you always know this is how I'm gonna end it, or does it just, you think maybe I'll do this one?
I didn't know. When I was writing Emperor, I had no idea how I was going to end it, but I knew I wanted to account for the father's voice in some way. And I one day I heard this angry voice in my head. So as soon as I heard that voice, I knew that it was the right voice for that, for that last chapter. So that just came to me one day, which rarely happens, but it was just like a gift from the writing god. So, and then actually for the last chapter of the Buddha in the attic, just told from the point of view of a predominantly white town after their Japanese neighbors have been taken away. That was actually a piece of unfinished business from When the Emperor Was Divine. I always wondered, well, what did the white neighbors think, after the Japanese were taken away? And I didn't really address that in my first book. So it's something that I wanted to deal with. And then I got the idea for this radical shift, just to suddenly we're seeing everything, America, through the point of view of the Japanese Americans. And then the last chapter, I just thought it would be, like you said, destabilizing, and yet inevitable at the same time, to end with this voice.
I think that's what makes your ending so extraordinary, is that they do feel inevitable when they come. You think this is absolutely the logic of where this novel has been going, and yet they at the same time, for me they're really destabilizing. They change my understanding of what the novel has been. They kind of shift the ground from beneath my feet in a really, really powerful way. Wow. I should say, if there are any other final questions, otherwise I think, Maddie, we are due to be wrap
Yeah, I
it up.
actually have a question.
Oh, great.
I was typing it out, so maybe I can just read what I was gonna write. Okay, I said I have a question, and it's about nursing homes.
Oh,
I said
yes.
the portrait of the nursing home is so desolate, almost dystopic, but with space for some sympathy or understanding towards the caretakers. And I was curious, when you were writing the portrait, did you think like these spaces are awful and they have to change, that they should function differently, or was it more a sense of this is the like very tragic but inevitable remedy for diseases that kind of prohibit or make home care very difficult or impossible?
I mean, I read a lot about different kinds of, nursing homes, care homes. And there's one place I think in Amsterdam called Hogeway where, it's almost like the Truman Show, but all the workers there are, you know, disguised as clerks in the grocery store, or, that it's made to seem like a very, very normal, complete world for the people who are suffering from dementia. And they don't realize that they're in a town that's not quite normal, but they don't see their caretakers as people in uniform. They're just, people. And that seems to be a model that works actually very well. And people would live in houses, and the architecture would be based on, you might have like a 50s motif, or a working class motif, or people who live very well might live in a fancier home, but you would create these spaces that reminded people of the places they've been in the past. And that those people, from what I've read, actually seem to be quite content. But that's a very, very expensive model to replicate. I don't think it's one. I mean, there may be a few places like that here in the States, but it requires a lot of money, which most people don't have. I don't think that all nursing homes at all are inherently bad. I was really kind of presenting a worst case scenario. So, I mean, my father also suffered from dementia, and I think after watching my mother's experience of being in a home, and there was so much going on with her. She needed just 24/7 medical care, but we kind of knew that it was the one thing we didn't want to do, was to send my father to a nursing home if he didn't have to go into one. So we were able to keep him at home, but that's also, it's not always easy to do. So I don't think there's any one easy answer. I mean, I think in this country, we really tend to warehouse our elderly, and in other countries like Japan, I think they're much more respectful towards their elders. And yet they're having a nursing home problem there too. There's so many older people. So I don't know. There's no ideal model. I mean, there are some that work better than others, but they require a lot of cash.
Sorry, that was a bit of a grim note. In retrospect. But, uh, Katie, do you have any final words? Or
No,
Julie?
beyond Julie, thank you so much. This was such a delight. It's incredible to speak to you about your wonderful work.
Katie, thank you. I'm so thrilled to be talking to you. I've just been looking forward to this
Oh,
for a long, long
likewise.
time. So
Likewise.
thank you.
Oh, I'm so delighted. Everybody, please, if you haven't already, please buy Julie's book. I think that, Maddie, the link is in the
Yeah,
chat.
the link is in the
Right?
chat, but you can also just go to our website and search for the swimmers. It will come right up. Thank you both so much for coming. It was really a pleasure to have both of you. And it was it was really an honor to be able to support in our small way the entry of the swimmers into the world. It's just a book that we feel really excited and happy about its existence. Thanks to everyone for coming. I hope to see you all again soon. And there's really no elegant way to end these. So I'm just going to say goodbye, and I will hit the end button. And I hope you all have a wonderful night.
Bye, Julie.
Thank you.